People lose hope because of their experiences, either with people, with life, or with God. When people don't see a way, there is a tendency. Our world is becoming more and more hateful. People are becoming more judgmental and bashful. Some people don't care about the feelings of us make available to us many opportunities, even when we mess up the opportunity we had the first time. Give us the grace to always try again. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please take a second and subscribe if you've not done so yet. Click also on the notification bell so that when a new content is uploaded, you will be one of the first to get it fresh and hot. Today, I want to talk on the topic Didactics on Suffering. Didactics on Suffering. It was Khalil Gibran who said, and I quote, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls, the most massive characters are seared with scars." Again, Khalil Gibran, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls, the most massive characters are seared with scars." The outline of these didactics are: number one, what is suffering? Number two, what are the effects of suffering? Number three, types of suffering. Number four, support systems in times of suffering. Number five, coping mechanisms and strategies in times of suffering. Number six, advantages, benefits, and value of suffering. Number seven, how do we respond to suffering? And number eight, other things we need to know about suffering. So let's begin with the number one on the top of our outline. What is suffering? Suffering is a state or condition of being in pain, hardship, difficulty, or finding oneself in a dark place. Suffering is a struggle with something that disrupts our lives. Suffering arises or occurs in our lives when there is a tension or a fight and battle between comfort and discomfort. At this point, let me ask you, my listener, what is your own definition of suffering? What does suffering mean to you as a person? The next on the topic is who suffers. Every human person at some point in their lives suffer. Suffering knows no color. Suffering knows no creed. Suffering knows no nationality, age, race, tribe, tongue, culture, ethnicity, language, and gender. Suffering knows no status, position, title, qualification, net worth, and your size. Suffering does not care if you are rich or poor. What are the effects of suffering? Suffering hurts. Suffering is unpleasant. Suffering makes us sad and angry. Suffering brings discomfort. Suffering stresses and depletes us. Suffering brings despair and causes pain. Suffering brings tension and depression. What are the types of suffering? Number one, we have what is called emotional suffering. For example, when we suffer from anxiety, bipolar, autism, depression, and things like that, suffering emotionally. Number two, we have physical suffering, like physical sickness, having accident, domestic violence, suffering from hunger, or suffering from obesity. Number three, we have what is called spiritual suffering, suffering from sin, suffering from unforgiving heart or unforgiveness, spiritual dryness, or what I call spiritual aridity, dark nights of the soul, suffering from desolation, struggling in one's spiritual life, maybe finding it difficult to pray. These are examples of spiritual suffering or how we can suffer spiritually. There is what I call social suffering. Like racism is a form of social suffering, natural disasters, unemployment, bad roads, dilapidated infrastructure, lack of adequate housing, bad policies, bad governance, poor wages, bad politics, and corruption. These are examples of social suffering. Finally, number 5, we have what is called moral suffering, like addiction to pornography, substance abuse, struggling with adultery and fornication, or masturbation, greed, lack of contentment, bias, prejudice, stealing, lies, gossip, indifference, and lack of charity. Emotional issues, physical problems, spiritual matters, social problems, and moral issues can cause us to suffer, not excluding personal mistakes like the sufferings or problems we bring upon ourselves and other human factors. Now, what are the support systems or networks available to us in times of suffering? Number 1, family. Number 2, friends. Number 3, support groups, faith-based organizations, local Christian community, associations and groups that one belongs to, colleagues at work, fellow students, counselors, therapists, religious leaders, and chaplains. These can constitute support networks that are available to us when we find ourselves in times of suffering. So, what are the coping mechanisms or strategies in times of suffering? How do we cope? How do we put up with suffering? Number 1, spirituality. Our spirituality can help us cope with suffering. Another one is physical exercise. Exercising can be emotionally beneficial to us when we are suffering. Meditation, being in touch with nature, enjoying nature. Our pets can also help us to cope during suffering. Music can also be a good coping strategy in times of suffering. Poetry, entertainment, self-care. Self-care, very important. Reading nice books, all sacred books, scripture, spiritual books, motivational books. Talking about the situation you are going through can also be a good way of coping with suffering. Religious articles and resources, like for Catholics, Holy Rosary, Holy Water, Anointing Oil, sacred images, prayer shawl, prayer rug, mantilla, sacred needles. All these religious articles and resources could also help in coping with suffering. Our families can also help us to cope during suffering. Friends as well as also sports. Permit me to take a break here, my friends, to introduce to you my website. Please do visit at www.venathel.com. I do also run a daily news blog at www.venathel.com/blog. Please make out time to visit, and if possible on daily basis, help me also share with your friends, loved ones, and pals. Now, let us continue with the talk, the didactics on suffering. So, what are the advantages, benefits, and value of suffering? Suffering develops our character. Suffering reminds us of our humanity and our fallen nature. Suffering prepares us for something great. Suffering reveals who our true friends are. Suffering or hard times reveals who our true friends are. Suffering tests our faith and our endurance, our persistence and our patience. Suffering has a salvific value. Something good most often comes out of suffering. Suffering toughens us. Suffering brings us on our knees and enables us to seek God and draw closer to Him. There is no better time to draw closer to God than in times of suffering. Suffering reveals who we truly are. Suffering brings out the best in us. Suffering makes us humble. Suffering opens our eyes. Suffering renews us. Suffering reinvigorates us. And finally, suffering teaches us the lessons of life. How do we respond to suffering? How we respond to suffering depends on us. We have the power to do that. We may not have control over what happens to us or what comes our way, but we have the control to respond in any way we want. So when suffering comes, be patient, have hope, wait. Develop a fighting spirit and a winning mentality. Do not quit. Never give up. Persevere. Persist. Pray. Hang in there. Identify and explore your feelings. Confront the situation. Do not shy away from it or be in denial. Seek help when necessary. Let me pause here again and introduce my books to you. If you are interested, you can purchase my books directly from my website or from Amazon. My first book is Lifted and Encouraged. The second one is Welcome to the World of Social Media. The third is Being Patient with Patience. The fourth one is Living a Fulfilled, Joy-Filled, and Successful Life. The fifth one is Suffering, Finding True Peace, Joy, and Happiness in the midst of life's difficulties, problems, and challenges. And at this point, let us continue with the final segment of our topic in discussion, Didactics on Suffering. Here are other things we need to note about suffering. Do not mock or scorn or make fun of anyone suffering. Not fair at all. Suffering is not meant for one person alone or a group of individuals. All human beings do experience suffering. Encourage and offer hope to the suffering. Pray for the suffering. Be there for the suffering. Some suffering is not permanent. They are only temporary. Again, some suffering is not permanent. They are only temporary. Always remember, you are not the sum total of what you are suffering from, nor are you defined by what you are suffering from. What you are going through does not define you or make you who you are. Life is not always fair. It's good that we know this. Life is also a battlefield. Life is a fight. Remember to smile through it all. Bitterness and going about complaining does not make the suffering go away. In fact, someone said, suffering or problems are like washing machines. They twist us, they spin us, and knocks us around. But in the end, we come out brighter, cleaner, and better than before. Looking for a book that can encourage and bring you hope in times of suffering? Kindly consider my book, Suffering, Finding True Peace, Joy, and Happiness in the Midst of Life's Difficulties, Challenges, and Problems by Venatius Agbasiere. This didactics was developed and prepared by Venatius Agbasiere, author, chaplain, motivational speaker, YouTuber, social analyst, and blogger. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.